America. Now let me talk for a minute, if I may, about the amendments that I have, and I'll preview those, and I won't spend a lot more time of the chairman and ranking member's time. I have a total of 7 amendments, actually 8, and let me just talk about them since I can't call them up. One amendment is on transparency. My friend President Obama wants us to be a transparent government. Throughout this bill are tons of reports that you, as American citizens, will never get to see. Matter of fact, I won't even get to see them because they're directed only to the Appropriations Committee. What is that all about? As a member of Senate, I can't see reports that are committed by this bill in terms of reporting back from agencies, and yet only the Appropriations Committee can see them. And more importantly, you can't see them to be able to hold us accountable to see whether we're doing our job. So one of the amendments just says, if there are reports required and they don't compromise national security interests, everybody in America ought to get to see them. Now, in the last appropriation bills, that amendment was accepted. But I'll tell you what will happen to it. They'll take it out in conference. They'll say, oh, it didn't make it through conference. The American people can't see this. They won't come out and say it. I'll have to publicize it. But they'll deny the ability for you to see the very reports that they're asking for in this bill. There's an earmark in this bill for a building less than 2 blocks from here called the Sewell Belmont House. That house is used for a multitude of things. They have $4 million cash in the bank right now, and we're going to give them another $1 million. They got money in the bank, but we're going to give it to them. Mostly what happens over there is fundraisers for members of Congress, for which they charge $5,000 to use it. They make money, and yet we've decided we're going to give them $1 million. Now, tell me that's a priority right now in this country. And so what we do is we take that $1 million and send that $1 million to the National Park Service, because right now we have an $11 billion backlog in our national parks, and they're falling down. But we refuse to fund them because we're doing things like this. There's another amendment I have. We now have a conflict between agencies where the Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Interior won't allow Homeland Security to protect our southern border because they're afraid it'll mess up the environment. So what we've done is we've said protecting wilderness areas is more important than protecting our border. And this amendment says none of the funds in this bill can be used to prohibit or impede the Department of Homeland Security from protecting us on the southern border. And yet it's happening every day. We have testimony. We have internal documents that show the Department of Interior is limiting the ability of Homeland Security to protect our southern border. Now that makes sense that we shouldn't do that. We should protect the environment. But you know, we won't have that environment if we don't protect our southern border. And what we do know is in those areas that our Border Patrol can't get to is where all the infiltration's coming today. It's where the drug trafficking's coming today. It's where multiple people are being raped by the people who are transporting illegal aliens through those wilderness areas and fish and wildlife areas. So what this amendment says is you can't use money in the Department of Interior to preclude the Homeland Security and the Border Patrol from doing its job, which is to protect us from the illegal transport of both people and drugs and weapons into this country. I have another amendment. We want to try to become more energy independent. We have all this renewable we're trying to do, whether it's wind or solar. And yet the Department of Interior is blocking the ability to create the transmission lines from where we have renewable sources, but now they won't allow the transmission lines to go across. So we want to get off foreign oil, we want to decrease our carbon, and now we've started to develop alternative sources, renewable sources, and we have an agency that's blocking the ability to get that power to us. It makes no sense. And we can do that in an environmentally friendly way. So we can't allow the Department of Interior and the ultra-environmentalists who say they want us to have renewable energy, but by the way, they don't want you to be able to use it. So we'll develop it and not have a way to use it. There's several $100 million in this bill that is used for the federal government to acquire more land. The federal government owns about 35% of all the land in the country today. But we can't take care of the land we have. I mentioned earlier the backlog at the national parks. The National Mall has a backlog. The Statue of Liberty has a $600 million backlog. Some of our biggest and best parks, Grand Canyon, Mount Rushmore, several others, have hundreds of millions of dollars in backlog. All the national park backlog grew $400 million in backlog last year. In other words, we're letting what we have crumble as we go and spend almost $360 million more on buying more land. We ought to, and this amendment says, don't buy the land, put the money in fixing our national parks, bringing them up. They're falling down. We actually have testimony where we're putting visitors at risk because our maintenance backlog is so great. Third from the last is an amendment to require a report so we know what we actually own. We don't know what we own. The last time we had any estimate was 658 million acres, and that was 2005. Nobody's done anything to know what we own, prioritize what we own, say what's important, what do we need to protect the most, what do we need to get the backlog straight on, how do we manage what we own. You can't manage what you own if you don't know what you own. So all it does is require a report on the total federal land owned by the federal government and the cost to maintain the land. So we can make coherent judgments about how to make priorities of what is important and what's not. This appropriation bill shoots from the hip because they don't have the facts with which to make the decisions on how to prioritize. Finally, we have this idea of national heritage areas. We now have 4 times more than was ever authorized in the original bill. And what happens is we create a national heritage area, and pretty soon you're out there on your farm or in your neighborhood. And because it's a national heritage declaration, we fund special interest groups that come in to lobby to make sure what happens to your land is what they want to happen, not what you want to happen with your land. So what we say as an amendment is that if we're going to create a national heritage area, all the landowners ought to be notified. And if they want to be included in that, allow them to opt in. Allow them to choose to be in the national heritage area. But if they don't want to be, their property rights ought to be secure. So what we say is allow them to decide whether they want in or out, and they have to opt in if they want in it. You know, our Bill of Rights guarantees our right to our property, an unfettered right. And what the national heritage areas do is destroys that. And it allows groups with an interest that is funded by the federal government, you didn't get any of the money, but special groups that come in and have the power and the money to lobby to change the restrictions and land codes against your will. And most people who have found themselves in a heritage area don't know it till they get ready to do something with their own land and find out that, oh my goodness, the federal government has caused somebody to change my ability to do what I want to do with my land. And I'm not talking crazy, I'm talking responsible action on our land. And so what we're doing is denying a fundamental right guaranteed under the Bill of Rights as we create all these heritage areas. So it's fine if you want to be in one, but if you don't want to be in one, you ought to have the ability to not be in it, and it shouldn't be assumed that you're in it because we in Washington say you should. You ought to say you should, and you ought to have the knowledge with which to make that decision. That's called real transparency. That's called protecting freedom. That's called letting people be responsible for their property rather than us mandating from Washington what will and won't happen with their property. And then finally, a bill amendment that I put through on every appropriations bill. And it comes from what President Obama said he wanted to do, and that is to mandate competitive bidding on everything we buy. No more well-connected, well-heeled inside deals. Competitively bid it so that you as American taxpayers truly get value for the dollars that you're putting up here. And even more important, the 43% that our kids are going to be paying for that they get value. Since we're borrowing their money, we're borrowing their future, at least when we borrow it, we ought to, and we're going to do misguided priorities, and we're going to overspend, and we're going to grow the government and double it in the next 5 years, the least we could do is to get real value when we go to spend your money and your kids' money. So as you can see, I'm not a very big fan of this bill. As a matter of fact, I'm not a big fan of any of the appropriation bills, because the whole premise under which they operate is here's what we had last year, and we're going to start from there. Without ever looking, here's how many billions we're spending, and is it being spent properly? Is there great oversight? No, there's not. There's terrible oversight. Is there duplication? We don't even care. We don't even look. And we don't make the hard choices that the next 2 generations need us to make. The most powerful committee in the Senate, the most powerful committee in the House is the Appropriation Committee. $400 billion of your money will be appropriated this year that is not even authorized. The appropriators don't even pay attention to the authorizing language because they're going to appropriate $400 billion of things that aren't authorized. So then we have this parliamentary rule that says you can't legislate on an appropriation bill, yet they legislate all the time by funding things that have never or have expired authorizations for spending. So we could eliminate $400 billion tomorrow just by following the rules of the Senate and the rules of the Constitution. But we play the game. And people come to kiss the rings to get what they want at home, to look good at home, and consequently, we're extorted to pay with a vote for a bill that's like this one, this big, 16.28% increase, so we can look good at home. Well, I want to tell you, the American people are waking up. There's a rumble out there like I've never seen. It's a rumble I've been praying for. This country needs to be taken back over by the people. This country needs to hold the members of this body absolutely accountable. And the only way that happens is that the citizens stay informed. And I'll end with this. There was a president named Ronald Reagan. My little 3-year-old daughter at the time called him President Raisin, because she couldn't say Reagan. And he said one of the most profound things I've ever heard said. He said, freedom is a precious thing. It's not ours by inheritance. It's never guaranteed to us. It has to be fought for and defended by each and every generation. Well, I'm telling you, in the last 20 years, our generations haven't come up to defend it. He wasn't talking about our military. He was talking about us being well-informed citizens, holding us accountable, creating the pressure for us to be transparent so that you can, in fact, know and count that we are doing the right best thing every time and that we put ourselves second and the country first. That's what he was talking about. And the rumble that's occurring in this country can't come soon enough or big enough to change both the Senate and the Congress. And it's not partisan. It's sick on both sides of the aisle. And what we need is a real revolt against the status quo and an engagement and an enlistment by the average American to speak out, to come out and hold us accountable to do what is best for the generations to follow and cause us to re-embrace what built this country, which is a heritage of sacrifice today to create opportunity for the future. Mr. President, I yield the floor.